So welcome to the next webinar in our series of webinars we're doing throughout 2017. Just an FYI, this will be recorded and you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to where you can access the recording and all the insights shared by Maggie today. To get started, let me give you the rundown in the next couple of minutes. First, I will tell you a little bit about us, what we do, and what we'll be talking about, and then a little bit about our expert who will be walking us through do this, not that, design for non-designers. This has been a highly requested topic, and the first time that we have touched on design specifically. We have incorporated into other webinars where we've talked about obviously the advantages of having a very visual aspect to everything you do. It attracts the eye, it increases conversion rates, but this is the first time that we have touched specifically on design. So I am personally very excited to be sharing this topic with you today. First and foremost, we are 97th Floor. We're an award-winning digital marketing agency, and we work with clients in enterprise as well as small to medium business sectors. And as you can see, across a variety of industries, these are just some of our clients. And you can find many more of those as well as case studies as in terms of what we produce with results on our website. Now, we are a collection of strategists, and we provide a range of full-service capabilities, essentially everything that's required to create and execute strategies that produce bottom-line results, from organic SEO, PPC, design and development, as you'll see today, to copywriting and video production. Now, today's webinar, we're going to be talking about design. For the majority of us, we're potentially non-designers. And the reason we're touching on this is because, one, it's been requested, but two, the pain points for this are, design can be hard, even simple design. And if you're like me, if you've ever known something that you want or how you want it to look in your head, but you have no idea how to make it a reality, or if you've looked at something that either you've created or someone's created for you and you think it just feels off. There's something that feels off, but you can't pinpoint exactly what isn't working. Welcome to my world, the world of design for non-designers. So this webinar, we'll break down what to do, and maybe more helpful will be what not to do in terms of getting good, solid design and all the returns that you get when you have design in place. What is not, I do like to let you know that what we won't be covering, and while Maggie will be covering practices that can be applied to your business and assets, we're not serving up templates, tools, or specific deliverables. Those types of assets, you can find a lot of those on our website, but today we're talking about principles. And in terms of listening to this, if you ever feel like any sense of overwhelm, think in terms of strategies, not specifics. Specifics, you can go back to this webinar once you get the recording, and you can deconstruct it even further and apply it specifically to your product, to your service, to your business, depending on what's working for you. But think in terms of, is this, the concept, is that making sense? Because conceptually, if you can understand where it applies, then you can develop the discernment to make it apply. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Maggie Call. Maggie has an immense portfolio. She's a senior designer here at 97th Floor, and she has worked on branding and marketing materials for major enterprise-sized companies. Probably all of the ones that you saw previously, she has had a touch point with. I do want you to know that even though she works on major brands, the tips and tactics shared today, they're universal. So whether you're small, medium enterprise within any industry, if you're a solopreneur, these tips will apply. Her specialties in terms of design are on typography and color, and understanding design in terms of business ROI and effectively communicating design hits and misses in a way that brings clarity to the buyer's journey. So she's a massive asset to us and our book of business here. Maggie knows what it takes to definitely draw people in. She knows what it takes to keep them on page, and she's able to articulate that in terms of how we design our landing pages, our lead pages, our product pages, all of these with the idea of we want a strong call to action that results in bottom line value. So she is the perfect person to be walking you through this webinar today, and she's quite an expert in her own right. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Maggie, and she'll be taking us into do this, not that, design for non-designers.
All right, guys, thanks for joining in. I'm really excited about this topic. And I apologize, I am under the weather, so sorry for my voice here. Um, Today we're going to be talking about design for non-designers. And I know that whether you're over budget or on a time crunch, sometimes you just have to do it yourself. And especially these days, we think we can do it all. Any skill or piece of knowledge seems to be just a Google search or a YouTube tutorial away. But the key with doing anything yourself is to try to make it look just as good as a professional, or the hope is to at least try to. You want to surprise people when you say, I made this. What you don't want is to show people what you created and have them already assume you made it. That's when you really know you probably didn't do a good enough job, is when other people can tell. Hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about. So today we're going to learn about design and how to design something yourself without really looking like you did. And all of these design principles come from a few basic rules, and let's get started. The first rule is to utilize font weights of a single font family and do not combine fonts. So the first rule, do not combine fonts. Save typeface combinations for the professionals. Combining contrasting or complementing fonts is a great way to add sophistication to any piece of work and really let the typography sing. Combining type transforms letters into art, and it's really bold and beautiful, and when it's done well, it really is stunning. But again, this is designed for non-designers. And when you combine fonts without really knowing what you're doing, it's really easy for it to look messy or lost or very amateur. There's a lot of technicalities in combining fonts, which I don't have time to go into today. So instead of guessing if you're combining the right fonts together or trying to combine fonts without having the experience or knowledge, just steer clear of it altogether. Only use font weights of a single font family. And I just want to add here that this doesn't mean your design will be boring. It means that you can now focus and hone in your skills using that one font, and then you can build your skills from there. So as a reminder to save typeface combinations for the professionals and just to keep it simple. It's important to utilize font weights of a single font family. So what is a font family? A font family represents a collection of fonts that share the same essential design but can vary in weight or thickness. So what are font weights? This is a great example of font weights. Right here I'm using the font Montserrat, and you can see it in thin, light, normal, and bold. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about font weights. And to utilize font weights is to make something bold or make something light, or vice versa. Just to make sure you're using all the typeface has to offer, it really helps give dimension to the page. It helps some parts of the page stand out and others sink in, and it also helps the user navigate around the page more comfortably. It helps boost the hierarchical elements of the page, meaning what is most important is prominently seen and everything else falls after that. This provides enough contrast on the page for people to understand what's important and what's not. And a good rule to follow using font weights is called the 2 times rule. So the 2 times rule is something that I use all the time, and it's very applicable in any aspect of design, whether you're doing an ad or a website or a flyer. And the basic elements of the 2 times rule are to make something bold and make something light. So going back to our font weights here, make part of the headline bold and the other part of it light. just to help give some contrast. So the key with this element is to make something 2 times as bold, because it's called the 2 times rule, or 2 times as light as something else. So we're not looking for just 1 step up, we're looking for 2. So don't make something bold and the rest regular. That's just not enough contrast. Make something twice as bold or twice as light as the rest. This will provide enough intentional contrast for the viewer to recognize the most important thing on the page. The other part of the 2 times rule is to make something twice as large or twice as small as something else. So the idea behind this technique is to help create hierarchy in the page. So what's noticed first, second, or third? And it helps give the type a little dimension. The 2 times rule is really great because when everything is the same size, nothing is prominent on the page, nothing really stands out, and when everything is trying to stand out with the same visual weight and try to be in the forefront, nothing actually ends up being in focus. So it's important to make something large and something small to help give focus and prominence and order to the content. So I have this example here. Let's say I'm designing an ad, and this is the copy I want on my ad. Hello world, my name is Maggie. And if I were to apply the 2 times rule and bold hello world, notice that I've left my name is Maggie is still in regular. And you can tell it's very slight, but you can tell if we're following the 2 times rule, we need to make it twice as large. So we should make my name is Maggie in light instead of regular. So let's see what that looks like. You can tell that the ad has totally changed in focus. So hello world is it's the boldest thing on the page, it's the biggest thing on the page. My name is Maggie is in light, it's secondary in hierarchy. And let's just explore a little bit with the 2 times rule and see what it would look like if we made hello world in light or thin and my name is Maggie in bold. So notice how the focus of the page has totally changed. So when it comes to design, it really is what you want to be the focus. So just continuing to explore the font weights with this sentence, and if we apply the 2 times rule with scale, we can tell that my name is Maggie is smaller, but it's also more bold. So it kind of just depends on what you're going for, and it helps to kind of explore all of these other options. Now let's say that this doesn't really work for me because I don't want my name to be the focus. I want hello world to be the focus. You can see how just using type weights really shifts the focus, and it's a really easy technique. Now if we go back to this one, this iteration with hello world in thin and the rest in bold, and we apply the 2 times rule scaling to hello world, notice that the focus is my name is Maggie. To me, this doesn't really feel right. The words are a little long, a little clunky and chunky. So let's see what it would look like if my name is Maggie was in light. That feels a little bit better. It's not as heavy on the page, but I'm not quite in love with how long the words are spanning. So I think we're just going to stick with this one. And an important thing to note with the 2 times rule is you don't always have to make something 2 times as bold or 2 times as light and 2 times as small or something 2 times as large. So you kind of just use your own discretion. So here I've chosen to make everything the same size, but to have hello world be in bold. The next point is to use scale. Do not make everything the same size. So don't make everything the same size. Make the first thing you want people to see the biggest or the boldest, so it's the most prominent. and then you just make everything else smaller. When everything is the same size, our eyes have a really hard time sorting through information. Elements fight for attention because they have the same visual force on the page. And when everything has the same visual force, each item appears to cancel each other out, and we focus on nothing at all. We can't focus on everything on a page. We have to choose. So when elements are spread sporadically throughout an ad, website, or flyer, we have to choose what to focus on. And most people will choose not to engage at all if they have to sort through information. People aren't just going to sit around and take time to figure out your website or your flyer or your ad. They want it handed to them. So it's your job as a designer to guide the user throughout that process. You have to feed information in an order that makes sense and make it as easy as possible for the viewer to digest information. And we do this with scale. So we need to use scale. Scale is a really important visual cue that helps guide users throughout the page. What you need to do with scale is define the focus point and emphasize it. So think about what you're making, your website, your ad, or your flyer. What's the main point you want to get across? What's the first thing you want people to see? And once you've decided the most prominent thing you want people to see, you make it the largest on the page. You make it really hard for someone to miss. And you use scale by making it the biggest. So let's go back to my example. So here I've revised my ad with a call to action to view my work. So it's a very simple ad. I just want people to click view work so they can see my portfolio. But if you notice this sentence, everything kind of bleeds together because everything's the same size, everything's the same font weight, and there's really no separation between space of the sentence and the call to action. So let's differentiate the view work from the sentence a little bit more. So one way to do it would be to underline it. And looking at this, it helps separate the sentence a bit more, but it's not quite working. It still feels a little clunky, and it really feels oversized and too large. And it really needs more emphasis. It needs to be separated a little bit more from the sentence. So if we change that underline, see what happens when we put it in a box. So we talked about using scale a lot, and things are starting to get a little bit chunky. So the black is really heavy on the page, view work is really large, it's almost overpowering hello world, my name is Maggie. It's a little much. So if we remember to use scale and make it a little smaller, it really helps separate the call to action from the sentence. And these are very simple techniques, but when they're done the wrong way, it's really hard to understand what's going on. So now that we've separated this view work from my name, they kind of live as separate entities. You read them as separate things that complement each other. But I really want view work to be a focus point, right? I want it to be a button that people are going to click on to view my portfolio. So how do you define a focus point? So let's go back. One thing to do is to what I call the squint test. So let's go back to the ad here. And if you squint your eyes and look at the ad, notice the visual weight on the page. So I can squint your eyes enough so that the letters sort of blur together and you're kind of just seeing blobs of shapes. So if you squint at this, most of the visual weight is in hello world, my name is Maggie. Even though it's a thin font, it's the biggest thing on the page. It takes up the most space on the page, so that's what I focus on. Lots of times, users or viewers on a website or a flyer or ad, you only have a matter of seconds to catch somebody's attention. And if you don't do it in the right way, you lose them immediately. So what I want to do here is really catch people's attention to view my work. I want them to know that that's a CTA that they can click to view my portfolio. So let's experiment with just inversing the type. And if we use the squint test, it still is the same, even though the color has changed. Hello world, my name is Maggie is still very prominent on the page. It carries the most visual weight on top. So let's go back to our other color palette, and if we want to create more focus, let's just see what adding a button around the type does. So notice that when you squint your eyes, view work, because it's in a black box, a black container, it's the heaviest thing on the page. And when you squint your eyes, you immediately notice view work. So at a distance, if somebody's looking at this for a second, they see view work first. And even though view work is the smallest on the page, it doesn't cover the most real estate on the page. It really is the most prominent because of that black box. Notice that you don't have to make everything huge on the page for it to require enough attention. View work is the smallest thing on the page, but it's the first thing that I look at. So just by using scale, we went from this, where everything is kind of jumbled together. It's hard to separate the call to action from a sentence. But when we use scale, we go from that to this. So it really helps emphasize definition in your ad or your website or your flyer. The next rule is using hierarchy. Do not throw elements on the page. So do not throw elements on the page. What I mean by this is you have to feed information in an order that makes sense. So you want to make it as easy as possible for the viewer to digest information, and you do this by creating an appropriate hierarchy in your design. So let's go back to my ad here, and just to show you bad hierarchy, here's an example of bad hierarchy. So this is very unsettling. I don't really know what's going on if I were a user coming to look at this for the first time. It's very unnatural to have a call to action in front of the sentence. I don't know what I'm clicking on or why I'm clicking on it, or even if I want to click on it. So creating a hierarchy in your design, creating an order of what you want people to see first, second, third. Another bad example would be this. We read from top to bottom, left to right. So it's very unnatural to see a call to action without any context. I'm reading left to right. I'm reading, somebody wants me to view their work. I don't know who they are, or even if I want to. So creating appropriate hierarchy really helps guide the user into what you want them to do, the end result. So it's important to create hierarchy. And you do this by creating order, and think of it as like a step 1, 2, and 3. So if I go back and redo the old hierarchy with the new hierarchy, here we read from left to right, so it's more natural to read the sentence first and then the CTA of view work. And the other example, it's a lot better, more understandable to first be introduced to someone or someone's work and then ask them to perform an action. And if we add in the 2 times rule back in, where I made hello world more bold, and then my name is Maggie as in light, notice the focus here. If we squint our eyes, going back to the squint test, hello world and view work almost have the same visual weight on the page. They're both very dark. They're both span a lot of the page. So the goal here is to emphasize a focus point and pick something that you want the user to see first, second, and third. So pick one thing you want the user to understand or see or read, and then everything should follow after that. You want to create a better flow for the user to digest information in a natural way, top to bottom or left to right, by having a good hierarcy. So here is my ad, and going back to the squint test, the Hello World and the View Work have a lot of visual weight on the page, and I want to create a little bit more focus to View Work. So another way to do that and have it stand out from the headline a little bit more is to add color. So use 2 to 3 colors in your design and do not use more than 3. So what I mean by this, by not using more than 3 colors, is color can be very distracting, and the use of too many colors can easily look like a circus. And color theory is a very intricate and involved process, and professional graphic designers most definitely use more than 3 colors, and they do it very well. They're familiar with shades and hues, and they know how to best complement colors into a great looking palette. But again, this is designed for non-designers, so the more simple you keep it, the better it will look. The idea here is to just keep it as simple as possible. By limiting the colors, you're sure to choose a color palette that actually works with the content instead of against it. A bad color palette can really cloud the purpose and draw away from the content, and it can even be off-putting. So it's important to keep the color palette simple by keeping the palette to 2 to 3 colors. So let's go back to my ad here, and let's first do it the wrong way. If I'm going to add 3 colors, this is what it looks like, which is craziness because this black and white version has good bones to it, it's a good layout, it's a good design, and it's so easy to just have that all go to waste by adding horrific color. So the problem with adding more than 3 colors is it just gets very complicated. So stick to 2 to 3 colors. You'll notice here with the squint test, my eyes are jumping around everywhere. The red is bold, the blue is like hyperlink, Internet Explorer blue. It's like very bright and obnoxious, and the button is so bright I can't even read the text underneath. So everything is working against each other, and it's very easy to screw up a design when you use too many colors, because you'll notice there's lots of loud colors in this design. If I were to look at this for even a second or two, I immediately look away. I don't have time to look at ugly things. I don't want to look at ugly things, and nothing is really sticking out. It's all competing with each other. So only use 2 to 3 colors in your design. The first color should be your main color, and this will be used the most. Choose something that's not obnoxious, something that doesn't scream, something that's easy on the eyes. Think about it if you were to fill a whole piece of paper or a whole poster board with this one color. Would it be unpleasant? Would it be obnoxious? You want to choose a color that's easily absorbed instead of standoffish. So something that's welcoming, something that's not too loud, because this color will be used the most. And then choose a secondary color. So this color will be used the least. This color should be the brightest, the most eye-catching color. So opposite of the main color, if you filled this color on a whole piece of paper or a whole poster, it should almost be too loud and obnoxious to look at. But since this is the second color in your color palette, it'll be used the least. So you'll use this color minimally, and so it can complement and not distract. This color might be used for buttons on a web page, or the color of type to a headline, or maybe it's just a border. Any way you use this color, it should be used less than the main color. This helps give immediate focus to wherever you decide to use this color. And then the third color, if you have to have one, should always be a neutral color. This will be used for everything else. So a neutral color meaning anything from cream to gray. This color should fade in the background. It should be used for elements that aren't pertinent to the message but that are necessary for the page. And maybe you make your body copy gray, or you use the neutral color as a light background for a footer or something. So think about the 2 or 3 colors you want to use in your design and how they should complement each other. In this example, going back to my ad, I'm going to choose a color palette for my ad. I chose this light maroonish color for my main color. So this color is easy on the eyes. It's very calm. It's not loud or obnoxious. It's kind of soothing. And then for a secondary color, an easy way to choose a second color is to just do a lighter or darker version of your main color. So here I've chosen my second color, this pinkish nude hue. You can tell they both belong in the same color family and they complement each other. They're not competing with each other. They're not both really loud and obnoxious. One's really subdued, the other's brighter. They really complement each other. And then for the third color, I just chose a gray. So you can see this color palette is very easy. There's a nice flow to it. There's one bold color and the other 2 are very subdued, very light, easy to fade in the background. So let's go back to the ad I have designed here. And remember when we used the squint test with this, there was a lot of visual weight competing between hello world and view work. So we can help create more focus with color. So if I make hello world this light maroon color, notice when you do the squint test, you have this heavy black button that comes into the foreground. So let's change that button to this maroon color, light maroon color. Notice when you squint your eyes, it's a lot easier on the eyes than black, and it kind of flows a little bit better, but it's not all the way there. I feel like the hello world and the button being in the same color, they kind of sandwich the ad, and things aren't being read separately. So if we take it a step further and add in our second color and our third color, notice I've changed my name as Maggie to being gray and the view work to be a lighter button. Notice where the focus is. The focus is solely on hello world. So it kind of depends about what you want the focus to be on and how you use the color. So if this might be good for me. I might like hello world to be the most prominent thing, and then view work to kind of be a secondary thing on the ad. Maybe that doesn't work for me, and I want to lighten up the headline and make the button more prominent on the page. So it all depends on where you want to add the emphasis. So here the button is definitely stronger on the page than the headline. Now if we go to explore color a little bit further and we make the background this light maroon color and everything white, notice how the focus and the feeling and the vibes of the ad have totally changed. And if we go further and want to subdue the button a little bit more and make it that pinkish nude hue, that helps the button go a little bit more into the background and the headline more in the foreground. So it all depends on the emphasis you want to make. And let's say the headline is too strong for me. I want the button to stick out more. Then I can do that by just switching the color. So the headline blends in a little bit more with the background, flows a little bit more. The view work button is prominent. It's in my face. It's the first thing I see. Um, Now, let's say that maybe this color is too strong for me. Let's try this pinkish nude color as a background. It's very soft, and the white type might be a little bit hard to read, so let's make the CTA more prominent by putting it in this magenta or this maroon color. You can also explore making the headline the same color to kind of sandwich the ad together. It all goes back to what you want viewers to focus on. There's lots of options with color and where you want to place color, but it goes back to what do you want viewers to see first, second, or third, and emphasize those points with color, your first, second, and third colors. So we went from this, an awful example of using 3 colors, to this. It flows a lot better, it's easier to look at, it's easy to digest. So even with color, we've already improved a lot on our design. The next step is to use a minimalist mindset. Do not clutter. So what I mean by do not clutter is don't decorate. When it comes to design, you should never decorate. Don't add icons or images or text just to fill up the space. All that does is create a sea of distraction, cluttering your purpose. And you don't want to give the viewer a reason to get confused. Make sure your elements support the cause of your design. So instead of adding elements just for the sake of adding them, make sure that everything on the page has a purpose. And if it's a decoration just because, throw it out. Simpler, the better. So when it comes to cluttering the page with this, that, and the other, you actually make nothing viewable at all. Because like we learned earlier, when things look like a mess, viewers just opt out and they move on. When a design has too much crammed into any given amount of space, you start to take away importance of each and every element because everything is so big, everything is so loud that nothing seems to be the focus. Rather, all of it's trying to compete against each other. So what you want to do is use space that will allow the elements to work together rather than battle for attentions. So I have my ad here. Let's say I really like this pattern and I want to add this pattern in the background. Some people really have a hard time with white space or negative space and they want to just fill up every corner. It's easy to tell right now that this isn't working because the pattern is really competing with the type. It compromises readability. It's really cluttering the page. It's not adding anything to the page or the purpose, and it's not helping anyone click on view my work. So it's important to use a minimalist mindset. The less you mess around with fonts, colors, spacing, or patterns, the less chance you have of making it look bad. So think intentionally and think more simply. Keep the necessary and just throw everything else out. With a minimal design, the purpose is clear and the message is obvious. So a minimal design leaves no room for confusion. It's straightforward, it's clear-cut, and it's easy on the eyes. And to embrace the minimalist mindset, you need to embrace white space. So white space doesn't literally mean there needs to be white areas on the page. Instead, white space allows elements to breathe. It helps give the eye a rest and to be able to move freely throughout the page to digest information. So utilizing white space around elements gives these elements their own sort of visual pedestal. White space can be used to frame elements as well. And don't think about white space as dead space or useless space. It's quite the opposite. White space is essential in design. Without room for our eyes to rest or for elements to breathe, it quickly becomes chaotic and undesirable, which we learned in this ad. So if I'm using a minimalist mindset and I really still want to use this pattern, I would maybe just have it on the corner. Notice it's in the gray color, so it's already subdued to the background, and it doesn't compromise the readability or the purpose with my headline or my CTA. So it's important to embrace negative space, which is the space around and between subjects of an image. So let's go back to this rendition of the ad. This already has a good example of using white space. And it's easier to show you white space by taking it all away. So if we took away all of the white space, or most of the white space, it would look like this. So notice the type really hugs the left edge of the page. The button around view work, very tight around those letters. There's no space between the headline and the CTA. It really is kind of crammed, but for no reason. So if we pull it away from the edge a little bit more and center it in the space vertically or horizontally, really helps the information breathe a little bit more. Notice around the border I have this negative space. I have this invisible negative space border around my type. And if we continue with that idea and move the button down, notice the button is still pretty tight around the letters, and it needs a little bit more space. So notice how much better the ad looks when there's a little bit more space around the button, a little bit more room for the type to breathe. So using negative space can really help push a positive message and give room for the eye to breathe. So when we use negative space, we go from this to this. Notice it's a lot more natural, there's a better flow, and it's a lot easier to digest. So let's run through the 5 points that we went through today. So utilize font weights of a single font family. So this means the 2 times rule. So remember, make something 2 times as bold, or 2 times as light, and 2 times as large, or 2 times as small. So when we utilize the 2 times rule, we go from this to this. Notice that there's more intentional focus on the page, and it reads a lot better. And if we want to take it a step further, make it smaller, notice it's even more focus on the page. The next rule was to use scale, and by using scale, we use the squint test. So we went from this when everything was the same size. When we did the when we did the squint test, we realized everything carries the same visual weight on the page, and nothing is really in focus. So if we scale that down a bit and add a little bit more emphasis, now we have a better focus on the page just by using scale. The next step was to use hierarchy to create a order of 1, 2, and 3. So this was an incorrect use of hierarchy. It's not very natural because we read top to bottom. It's not natural to read an action before we even know what the action is for. And this makes a lot more sense. The next step was to use color, and remember only to use 2 to 3 colors, choosing a main, a secondary, and a neutral. So here was my ad here. It has good bones, everything looks good in black and white, and how easy it is to just ruin everything by adding too much color. So we go from that to that when we apply the color rule. The last is to use a minimalist mindset. So this means to embrace negative space. So we go from this, where everything is hugging the left edge, the button around view work is tight around the letters, nothing really has room to breathe, We go from that to that. So it looks a lot better. There's this invisible border around the ad of negative space. Everything can live on its own. So I want to show you a few examples of how these principles are put to good use. So this is a great example by Dark Horse Analytics, and they're really just showing how to simplify a graph, but notice that they're using all of the principles that we have talked about earlier. They're simplifying the graph. They took away all of the color, all the background colors, all the bar colors. They're simplifying the numbers. They're adding white space. They're rounding the numbers to make it more simple, removing repetitive elements, changing the font a bit, adding some emphasis. So really, less is more. Making it more simple makes it look a lot better. If you feel like you need to put color in everywhere, you're not doing it right. It can be done in black and white. It can be done very simply. Another example is this bar graph. So they're going to show us how they simplify this bar graph. Notice there's lots of color, there's shadows, beveling, outlines. It's a lot going on. And all of those items aren't really pertinent to the message. I don't need the shadows of the bar graphs to know it's a bar graph. So really just simplifying the visuals, and it helps the information come through a lot more. Notice how bare this graph is getting, but you still get the point across. Before, there's so much color, there's so much going on, and after, you still understand what it's about, but it's just a lot simpler. And then one last example is with line graphs. Again, there's lots of dark, heavy color, unnecessary items on the page. They're removing grid lines, removing decoration items like shadows, what we talked about, things that aren't really helping portray the message, that just seem like decorative elements. And I really like the use of color in these examples, how the gray kind of fades to the background. The focus is on the lines, the whole point of the graph. So a really good example of how simplifying can help bring the message forward and help it be more prominent. So think simply. You don't have to do a lot to make design look good. In fact, you should be doing less. So I wanted to share with you guys a few examples of infographics I've done here at 97th floor and kind of how I go about creating those. So here I have my first example. I just laid out the content here. It's about e-lawyering and virtual law practices. And then I have about 4 stats to display. So first, I'm going to have the title be the most prominent because nobody's going to read anything if they don't know the title. So I'm going to have the title be the most prominent. And then with the stats, I don't want them to get confused with each other. I want them to live on their own. So I'm going to separate the stats. And this way they live on their own. They can be digested separately. They don't get confusing with each other. But the stat or the number is kind of getting lost in the stat. And I really want to have that be prominent. It's the numbers that people are interested in. So I'm going to make that really large. So notice I've totally exaggerated the 2 times rule. I've exaggerated the numbers. They're huge. I can tell that they're related to their own individual stats because of correct hierarchy. And then my last step here is just to break up the text with some visual icons. So these icons help people realize that these are different stats about different things, and the icons are kind of just a visual aid for the stats. So my last step would be to add color. So here's the finished infographic. I've added color to help ease on the dark, heavy black content on the page by making the title this reddish orange color. And everything looks like it flows pretty nice. There's a lot of visual weight to the numbers, which is what I really want people to see. Another example is this infographic on criminal offense statistics and caseloads in the United States. So I have two basic stats here, one about the number of prisoners, one about prison spending. So what I want to do again is make the title the biggest. So now here I'm using two fonts, but if you design for non-designers is to not use two fonts. So if I were you, I would just have in the United States be bold, and then the same font as criminal offense statistics and caseloads. So I really want to help separate the two stats from each other, so I'm just going to have one on the top and one on the bottom. And now focusing on the bottom stat for a bit, it has its own title, so I want to make that big and prominent so people understand what they're looking at. So I made the title bigger, I separated the federal from the state, and it seems to make a little bit more sense because everything is in its own space. And notice I've made prison spending from 1980 to 2013 really big, but because it's in a light color, when you squint your eyes, it's not the most prominent thing on the page. The title of criminal offense statistics is still most prominent on the page. So with prison spending stat, federal and state numbers, I really want to emphasize the numbers. It's the whole point of the stat, and it's very interesting. And I feel like the gray gets a little bit lost. So I'm going to make it a darker color, and I'm going to make it bigger. So again, I'm really using the 2 times rule over and over again here. The little stat to the right of becoming the fastest growing item, this belongs to the state topic. So we need to figure out a way to bring that back into the state. It looks kind of like it's floating all by itself, and I don't really know what it's really relating to. So I'm just going to add a shape behind it that points to where it belongs, and this way that whole stat makes sense. And all of this makes sense and looks great, and even without icons. So the next stat to focus on is on the top right. There's a lot of numbers and information going on here, but I really just want to emphasize one. So I'm just going to choose 1.4 million. I'm going to make it big. I'm going to make it dark. So notice all the varying type really complements each other, and when you squint your eyes, there's still hierarchy in the page because I've used color well, and I've used scale well, and I've used hierarchy really well. And then the last step, added icons, and then adding color. So the color palette is very subdued. There's only one really bright color, that green color, and I use it very sparingly, going back to our color rules. The last example I want to show you is very simple. I don't use icons at all, so this will be very applicable for whatever you guys are working on. This one is sources and types of cyber threats. I have internal threats of cyber hacking stat, and I have an external threat stat about malware and viruses. So first, again, I want to separate the title from the rest of the text. And because if we read left to right, it's more natural to have the title on the left than it is to have it on the right. The next step would just be to make the titles of cyber hacking and malware and viruses more prominent. So this way, at a glance, I know what the stat is going to be about. So I'm going to make those titles a little bit bigger. But I noticed that internal threats and external threats, they're not really pertinent to the message. It's a nice added information, but it's not pertinent. So I think it would look best if we just make it smaller. It's still there, but it doesn't demand so much attention. And it makes the the cyber hacking and the malware viruses shorter on the page, and not require so much space. The next step would just be to add color. So again, using this reddish orange color with gray, and then just repeating color on the other side, complementing color. Now I feel like the dark text everywhere is a bit heavy, and I feel like some elements should pop out more on the page. So I'm just going to make some titles white. So here's a finished infographic of this one. There's no icons, very simple. And this one I'm only using color, scale, and the 2x rule. And I just want to emphasize whenever you're designing something to keep in mind these 5 rules, because if something looks bad, it's because one of the rules has not been applied or hasn't been well thought out. So with that, I will just wrap up my presentation and hand it back over to Shantae.
Awesome. Thank you, Maggie. Stay on the line. We are at the hour, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but I do have one question that I want to get your expert opinion on, and that is, you know, when you're creating something and you just don't feel like you're getting anywhere with design, you don't like what you've made so far, how do you get unstuck? Like, what's the best? I'm sure this happens to you as well.
Yes, for sure. I get stuck a lot, and it's definitely part of the process. The best thing to do is step away from it for half hour, a day, I mean, whatever time will allow. Give your mind a rest or a break from staring at the same thing. And when you come back, just start over, start new, and keep it simple. Lots of the times when I get stuck, I'm trying to do something too complicated, or I'm not starting simple enough. So start simple and start with the first thing you want to be the most prominent, and then the second, and then the third. So make something huge, something medium, and something small, and just go from there. Start as simply and as low as you can. And this will help take out the decorative elements, anything else that you've been trying that's too complicated. Just get down to the bare bones. Another great thing that I like to do is to ask for somebody else's opinion. They don't have to be a designer. They just have to be a person. And everybody has a great view on design. Everybody sees something different. So it's great to get other people's opinions and to kind of just take in what you want, what you feel like is applicable to your design, and then go back and just start as simply and as bare bones as possible.
That is great advice, to just know that it is a process even for you. So for a designer, respect the process. Don't get hung up if you feel like you're just not hitting it each time. Love it. Okay, so let me take over presenter rights again, and we're going to wrap this up. Thank you, Maggie. As a reminder, you will receive a link to the recording and the deck. We'll provide the deck. That deck alone will be super, super useful. That is what we have today. Thanks for joining us, and we hope this was super helpful. So questions, comments, concerns, as always, hit us up at 97th floor, and until next time, cheers. Have a good one.